this is the second talk of the evening, and we'll be talking about adopting Rust. Now, when you try to have this conversation, usually it's from the point of view of a Rust advocate. It's about how do you persuade your manager to use Rust? That's often the undertone, which I think is an interesting skill to have. That's something I've done in the past, actually here at TrueLayer, which I realized we haven't thanked. TrueLayer is hosting us tonight. They're also a company that uses Rust quite extensively. So if you're interested into Rust, that's a good place to find. But it was a company that was not using Rust at the beginning. I worked in the process of adopting Rust here at TrueLayer years ago. But there's a lot of content about persuading managers, and I think there's not enough content about, you're persuaded, like you're convinced that you want to do Rust. How do you do this thing? Like, how do you roll out Rust successfully? How do you get your first project, up and running without doing a badly written Rust rewrite, as we saw in the previous talk? As it happens, you can write bad software in any language, including Rust. That needs to be said. So this is what this talk is about. Like, you're convinced you want to do Rust. How do you make that process a success? And before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'll give you 2-3 informations about myself. My name is Luca Palmieri. I work for Mainmatter as a principal engineering consultant, which basically means I go around and do talks like this and partner with teams around the world. You can find my Twitter handle. I'm also nostalgic, like Ernest, right there. And there's also the link to my blog where you find my stuff. I have done a bunch of stuff in the Rust community, libraries, tools, trainings, but I'm probably best known for being the author of this, Zero to Production in Rust, a book teaching you how to use Rust for backend development. If that's something you're interested into, pick it up, it's nice. Other than that, I'm currently working on playbook, which is a web framework, not yet released in private beta, which hopefully is going to be very nice to use. If you're interested, there's a link there as well. Said that, let's get to the meat of the talk because the night is short. 2 main things: how to build your first Rust team, and under the assumption that was successful, how to scale that up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams, whatever that is. So building your first Rust team, first choice, first impulse that you might have is, okay, I'm going to hire somebody, a bunch of Rust people. And as Ernest said at the beginning, obviously they're going to hire a bunch of senior Rust developers, which happen to be, everywhere. You just need to go grab them. The reality is just don't do this. And the reason don't do this is twofold. Number one, there's not that many senior Rust devs. Like, if you go out there looking for Rust production experience, so folks who have been there and have built non-trivial Rust systems which have been running happily, hopefully, for a few years, there's actually a fairly small pool of people. Rust has been around for a long time, but it has not been that popular for such a long time, which means that a lot of companies are actually picking up Rust now. The people who have years of production experience are few, and they command very high salaries. So hiring would be slow and expensive because you're all competing for the same folks. And depending on how deep your pocket is, you might or might not be able to afford it. Second thing is, if you're just starting with Rust, right? Like, you're a company that's evaluating their first Rust project, how committed do you truly are to Rust? If you go there and you say, I'm hiring for Rust jobs, you are going to get a lot of people who want to work with Rust. Now, what may happen, and in any experiment needs to be a possibility that you are contemplating, is that the experiment doesn't pan out. This Rust first project, this Rust adoption thing, it's not right. Either it doesn't succeed or you realize that it's just not the right thing to do. Now, if you bring on board a bunch of people for Rust jobs, and then suddenly you have no Rust projects, I don't need to explain to you how that is going to end. So it's going to be unpleasant for both parties involved. So don't go out there advertising Rust jobs until you truly think that that technology is going to pan out. Otherwise, things might get rocky. So my suggestion, generally speaking, is if you want to use Rust and you want to do a Rust pilot, start by looking internally. Like, what folks do you have on your team? Now, first and foremost, let's cover the basics. Do you have anyone who knows Rust? Which, you might say, I should know that. Not necessarily. Like, these people might be using Rust in their spare time. They might be doing, a home lab, a little Arduino project. They might have got some handiwork with Rust that they haven't necessarily shared with you. Or you might be very lucky and, you got someone who was working with Rust in a previous job. That usually doesn't happen, but, there's no harm in asking. If you're one of these people, you want to lean on them. Like, they need to become the fulcrum, the center of your first Rust project. Make it so that they can own and make it so that they can feel that the success of the project is their success. You might have 5, 6, 7, 8 people who have some level of Rust experience. You do not want to stuff the entire project with Rust experts. And the reason for that is that you want to develop a code base and a code style that's going to be suitable for folks at various levels of expertise to contribute to. If you stuff a project, with a tiger team, in quotes, people are very senior, very experienced, are going to use advanced patterns from the get-go. When the project eventually succeeds, what you're hoping for, you're going to have to rebalance seniority. You'll have to bring in juniors, intermediate developers. And if this code base is very impenetrable and difficult to use, that's going to be a painful project. Instead, if you just mix in, a bunch of Rust, more senior people, and a bunch of Rust novices, you'll naturally get a style that is suitable for all levels of expertise. So my suggestion is get some folks, get some champions, but do not stuff the entire team with champions. That can go not as well. Now, you might not be among the lucky few, and so you don't have any Rust experts in your team. So you need to look for language proximity. There's two big families of languages you can look for. Number one, obvious, everybody's thinking about this, C and C++ developers. They've been thinking about memory. They know, the landscape of what it means to manage memory. And a lot of the patterns that Rust codifies inside of the compiler, they have learned to use in their day-to-day, even if they're not codified by the C or C++ compiler. So these folks obviously will have to change the way they do things, but the bridge they need to cross is not that long. So this is a good pool of people to look from. The second pool, which is not mentioned as often, is actually functional programmers. Because yes, Rust is a system-level language in the sense of it gives you very precise control as to how things execute and how memory is used. But Rust is also a very functional language. Like you are managing nullability with options. You're managing fallibility with result. You have algebraic data types, which actually play a gigantic role in the way you model your domain. All of these things are the bread and butter of folks working with Haskell, OCaml, F#. Yes, they haven't thought about how the bits are laid out on the heap, probably in a decade. But in the same way of C++ folks, they have a shorter bridge to cross. So that's the only thing they need to learn. So if you get folks from one of these two groups, there's a higher chance that they are going to be productive faster than a random person learning Rust. Said that, I learned Rust coming from Python, so everybody can do it. Third thing, and this is often not stressed, but I think it needs to be stressed, you need to make sure that folks want to do this. Not everybody likes to do the new shiny thing. Sometimes, there's a little meme that developers always not like to work with the shiniest and newest tools. That's actually not true. Like if you go around talking to people that actually do the job, a lot of them have a toolkit, they know it well, can get shit done, don't want to be bothered with something else, unless there is a reason to go and learn that something else. So you need to go to the team that needs to develop this project, and you need to be sure that they want to be on that project. Because fundamentally, you're asking them to step outside their comfort zone. And that means being a beginner again, like making mistakes, being exposed. Some people might want to do it, some other people might not want to do it. Check in, make sure that everybody who's on this project is committed. Cool. Oof. So, this stage, you have your team, you have the people that need to ship this first Rust project. Now you need to make sure that they get in tip-top shape. You want to make it so that when they try to deliver this project, they succeed. Because you don't get a lot of shots, bringing new languages into a company. If you miss it, then the next one might never come, or it might be not your shot. So, what options do you have? Number one, self-guided learning, which basically means here's a bunch of manuals. Go read them, come back, and know in Rust. The good thing is, in Rust, there's excellent resources to learn Rust at your own pace. This is how I learned Rust, for example. Just read the fucking manual and then go do it. My recommendation is do a mix of books and hands-on exercises. And that's because you can read books and you can feel like you know the language, right? You need all these books. You never code, just read through. And you get all these patterns and all these names and all this terminology and all kind of makes sense until you actually go and try to do stuff. And then nothing works, you don't know where to start, and you have errors that you're puzzled at. So you always want to get a mix of reading, so to understand the foundational concepts so that you can reason from first principles when trying to troubleshoot. But at the same time, you need to get the language going under your fingers. There's no substitute for that actual exercise and practice. So if you want to get good at writing Rust, you need to write 1,000 lines of Rust. That's the way it works. In terms of books, to learn the language, my suggestion, pick one of these three, you can't go wrong. Number one is the official Rust book, which you probably know and love, I hope. The second one is Programming Rust from O'Reilly. It's geared towards a slightly more senior developer reading it, which means that it's a bit more faster paced, but that might be something you want because you know your stuff just from another ecosystem. You just want to translate that back into Rust. Third one, Rust in Action, uses a slightly different approach. It's more exercise-driven, so you're building small projects throughout the learning experience. That's actually a very nice way to learn. So any of these three is good, just read one. From there, exercises. 2 places to look, first and foremost. Number one is Rustlinks. Rustlinks is a GitHub repository that you can find. I think it's under the Rust organization, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, search Rustlinks. It's a bunch of exercises, each of which comes with tests. So it explains the concept, like how to iterate over a vector. And there's a little test to check that your solution makes sense. You do them one by one, and suddenly you start to, remember what's in the standard library, remember the key methods, and the language gets fluent under your fingers. The other one is exercise, I don't know, one.io. It has a variety of tracks for different languages, one of which is Rust. You can get people to review your exercises. There's a bunch of mentors. It's a very nice way to pick up a new technology. Either of this, just go do it. If you need to go deeper, then the path bifurcates or trifurcates, depending on what you need to learn. If you need to do embedded, there's another free book called the Embedded Rust book. It's maintained by the Embedded Working Group. Very nice point to get started, getting led to blink. If you need to do APIs and backends, obviously I wrote this, I think it's good. You can get zero to production in Rust. If you need to get better at Rust, the language, so get more sophisticated, look perhaps at FFI, some of the niche topics, then Rust for Rust Station is a very good read. What I don't suggest is that you read one of the books I mentioned before, and then you go straight to this one, so you never write code in between. That's, I think, a recipe for spending a lot of time without actually learning how to do things. Just warning you. Said that, self-learning can play out beautifully. I've done it. I'm proof you can learn Rust, but it takes a while because you're on your own. You are reading all this material. You need to metabolize it. You need to make sure you actually understand it. That is a process that takes its time. If you are in a rush, you can opt for a few other ways of getting up to speed or getting your team up to speed, basically. Number one is formal training, which basically means get a person that knows Rust to teach your folks. It's a very common solution to speed things up, and there's 2 variations of this. If you are a large company, so you have a team of 6, 7, 10, 15, you get a trainer to come at your place. That means that the training curriculum is usually going to be tailored specifically to what you need, so you can make sure you're not wasting time. And it's generally a very nice experience. The alternative, you have a small team, 1, 2, 3, 4 people, you go look for a public training. This might be done by training companies such as Mainmatter. So once in a while, we say, we're going to go and do a session on testing, and everybody can sign up individually. More often than not, you can find these at conferences. Rust Station, Eurorust that we organize in October, there's always a workshop day. And that's a very easy way of going by 1, 2, 3, 4 tickets. At Rust Nation, as Ernest has mentioned, I'll be doing the expert track. So if you're looking for that, please sign up. Said that, the key thing here is interactivity. Like, there's no point in doing a training if you get a trainer, to stand behind the podium like this, talking at you for like 8, 9, 10, 16 hours. That's the same with watching a YouTube video. Like, you can get that on YouTube. What you want is an expert that your engineers can ask questions to, because that's what speeds up the learning process. I'm doing some stuff, I have a doubt. Instead of spending 60 minutes on Google, I ask the person, he explains. Go back, rinse and repeat. If you get this, virtuous cycle going on, then you're actually going faster. So that's the key thing to look out for a training is, am I going to be able to ask instructors questions? The answer is no, not really a point in doing that. Now, you're even more in a rush, right? So you can't afford to do the learning and then doing the thing. You want to do the learning and the thing combined. This is what team augmentation can do. If you want to do this, instead of getting some experienced people to teach your engineers, you get some experienced people to work with your engineers. And let me be very clear, this is not outsourcing. This is not, going to a bunch of consulting companies. I have these requirements to build a thing. That doesn't actually make anything for building Rust expertise inside your organization. This is about embedding these people inside of your organization. And the idea is that while your team is learning, they're also delivering the project. Because mentoring and teaching is happening continuously. It's happening with pairing sessions, it's happening on code reviews. Obviously, this is the most expensive option of all the ones I listed, and might or might not be one you might go for. A slightly lighter touch option is code audits, which basically means get somebody who's an expert and come and review my code base. Perhaps you got a bunch of green Rust engineers, they've done something, like Edward was mentioning before, which doesn't quite look right. And then you're like, have a look at this, and then come back with a report. That report will have critical issues, like there might be some very, very wrong things with what you've written. People are like, oh, Rust won't compile if it doesn't work. Trust me, I've seen horrifying things that did compile. Then you're gonna get some recommendations on things that could be done better, might be more idiomatic. And generally, you can waive what comes out of the report in a technical roadmap that you work on at your own pace, whatever that is. And the alternative is to do this at the beginning of the project. So rather than correcting the mistakes, trying to set the project on the right tracks from the very beginning. This depends on what you prefer to do. Now, at this stage, you have done this first Rust project. If it was a failure, you don't get to this phase. If it was a success, then you might get this problem, which is in the category of good problems to have. How do I scale up? So you might get a demand spike, which might be transient or permanent. Like you might need a couple of extra hands for 3 months. If that's the case, don't go hiring full-time employees, get contractors. Sort out the demand. When that's done, send the contractors away and keep going. But more often than not, and more interestingly, the demand is structural. Like you build a product, people are buying it, now you need a larger team to maintain it. And that maintenance goes, for the long term. So how do I go about hiring Rust employees? Well, at the beginning, I discouraged you from doing this, but the reality is that hiring for Rust positions is very easy, as long as you require people to have Rust production experience. And that's because developers are excited to do Rust. Like if you publish a Rust position for a nice company, people are gonna apply in swarms. I have personally seen this in the past. You're gonna receive way more CVs than you can even process. And the key point there is that they're keen to learn Rust. There's gonna be some true gems in that hiring pipeline, but everything is conditional on you being able to train them to actually get that gem out of the potential of the person. The good news is everything you've done so far, so everything you've done to get your first project off the ground and make it successful, everything you've done to get that team in tip-top shape is exactly the same work you're going to be doing now for your new hires, with the nice bonus that now you have Rust experts because you formed them in the first project. So a lot of the things about team augmentation that I was mentioning before, you can do internally with people from the other team because now you have that central, center of excellence that can train the rest of the company. Now, some practical things that, it's important to mention. I have a Rust job. Who do I tell? Where do I put it? Usual places, LinkedIn, Indeed, whatever is your favorite job board. But there are some few Rust-specific channels which I think you should be keeping in mind if you are a hiring manager. Number one, every 6 weeks, there's Reddit. There's a thread in our Rust, which is called Job Seekers and Offerers. I don't remember. Anyway, you can go there, put one comment per job opening. You need to fill some information, so you can't just say, I'm hiring with a competitive package. You got to be a bit more specific than that. But it's usually checked out by people in the Rust community. So if you want to get somebody who's a Rust expert or wannabe Rust expert, that's a great place to go. The second one is Rust-focused events, such as this one, and conferences, such as Rust Nation, Eurorust, RustNL, Rust in Zurich. In Europe, you have to take your pick. Out of curiosity, raise events. Who here works with Rust on their daily job? A lot more than I was expecting. Who here wants to work with Rust at their daily job? Still a lot. So this still works. You can go here and say, I'm hiring, and get a bunch of people. So that might not be enough, depending on what you do. So there are recruiting agencies that start to specialize into sourcing Rust developers. I don't have any specific names to give out, but if this is a kind of service that you need, there are folks out there providing it. So just make a little research. Said that, multiple companies of all sizes are adopting Rust successfully. You've seen the slide from Ernest at the very beginning. There's too many logos, like we need to get a deck. And I've seen, I keep seeing this happening at various scales. Like working at Mainmatter, we get the opportunity to speak to a lot of folks. And there's a lot more Rust than you might think. In a lot of places you might not think of. Said that, take everything I said in this talk as kind of a playbook. Like it's a bunch of different tools and techniques that you can deploy situationally. Depending on the company, depending on the stage, depending on the project, you might want to go down one route rather than the other route. Take it as a reference that you can like pick and choose from. Said that, if you need help, obviously, come and reach out to us. This is the digital place where you can find us. Otherwise, I'm here, flesh and blood, and you can grab me pretty much until the end of the event. And that was everything. Thank you very much. I think I can take 2 questions from the audience, if there are any.
So I was wondering if you had any recommendations for companies that do training. Obviously, Mainmatter is up there. I've heard, I'm aware of Ferris.
Yes.
Are there any others that you consider to have like good reputation in the Rust community?
I mean, there's depends first and foremost what kind of training you want, right? And I usually bucket that into 2 categories. There's teach me Rust training, and there's specialized trainings for some specifics subdomains. Getting started with Rust, there's a variety of companies offering it. Mainmatter is one, Ferrous System is another one. There's Tweed Golf in the Netherlands. There's Red Badger here in London, and probably many more that I'm not aware of. When it comes to specialized training, then each of these companies has areas of expertise. So Ferrous, for example, is specialized in embedding. That's something they do very well. That's something we don't do. Like if you come to me and say, I want an embedded training, I'll tell you, I can't offer it. You ask those folks. Well, if you come to us, we do backend, we do advanced, basically Rust in the cloud type of things. So depending on what you want, I would say research what the company specializes into and make sure that it's aligned with the type of learning path that you need to support your engineers. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
And another one on that as well is conferences are a good way to test, right? Like if you are evaluating, for example, Mainmatter as a trainer, rather than booking a private 20 people private training from the get-go, you can go Rust Nation, you grab 1 ticket, you go to the workshop, you're like, are these guys good trainers, yes or no? And that's a way to trial, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.